ओके, स्टार्ट करें। ओके, वेलकम बैक फ्रेंड्स। सो स्टार्ट करते हैं। एंड आफ्टर द क्लास, दोज ऑफ यू who haven't qualified and are going to write 2023, उन उसके बारे में मैं थोड़ा सा स्ट्रेटेजी डिस्कस करूंगा, ठीक है? बट आफ्टर द क्लास। नाउ मूविंग ऑन, क्वेश्चन नंबर 6 पर आते हैं। वेबर्स इंडस्ट्रियल लोकेशन मॉडल अगर देखोगे तो इट वाज आज इन 2021, ठीक है? दैट मीन्स फ्रॉम माई साइड द चांसेस ऑफ क्वेश्चन बीइंग आस्क्ड फ्रॉम वेबर विल बी लो। सो अगर हम देखें कि क्वेश्चन कौन सा पूछा गया है, प्रेजेंट अ क्रिटिकल अकाउंट ऑफ एल्फ्रेड वेबर थ्योरी ऑफ इंडस्ट्रियल लोकेशन, ठीक है? सो दिस वाज द क्वेश्चन विच वाज आस्क्ड। नाउ जनरली अगर हम देखें तो यूपीएससी रिपीट नहीं करता है टॉपिक्स, बट देयर हैव बीन केसेस वेयर इट हैज बीन रिपीटेड। लाइक फॉर एग्जांपल, क्लाइमेट चेंज में रिपीट किया है। even in models and theories में they have repeated the topics, remember, but you have to remember that किसी topic के कई angles होते हैं, so they didn't repeat the question, just they asked the same topic although from a different angle. So जो क्वेश्चन पूछा गया है, critical analysis of Weber's industrial location theory, I don't think it is going to be asked. However, if they want to surprise, because sometimes UPSC does surprises us, सो व्हाट दे विल डू, इस तरह के क्वेश्चन जो जैसे आइसोडोपेन, आइसोटिम, दीज टाइप ऑफ क्वेश्चंस एसेंशियली दे विल बी आस्किंग, ठीक है? जैसे कि यहां पर मैंने लिया है, इफ यू लुक इनटू आइसोडोपेन, आइसोटिम कई बार पूछ लिया है पीछे, बट लोकेशनल ट्राइंगल भी पूछा है 2 बार, लेकिन हो गया, थोड़ा टाइम हो गया लोकेशनल ट्राइंगल को पूछे हुए। लाइक फॉर एग्जांपल, इफ यू लुक इनटू द लोकेशनल ट्राइंगल क्वेश्चन व्हिच वाज आस्क्ड, इट वाज वंस आस्क्ड इन 1998 में पूछा गया। देन आई थिंक 2009 में वेट ट्रायंगल पूछा गया, उसके बाद से नहीं पूछा गया, ठीक है? दैट मीन्स देयर इज ऑलमोस्ट कितना गैप हो गया, 12 years। सो देयर इज अ चांस कि अगर ये क्वेश्चन इस टॉपिक से कुछ पूछता है तो इट हैज टू बी लोकेशनल ट्राइंगल्स हो सकता है, ठीक है? सो डेफिनेटली इसको कर लेते हैं फटाफट। इट इज अ शॉर्ट नोट, जनरली अगर देखोगे तो इट हैज बीन आस्क्ड मोस्टली एज एज अ शॉर्ट नोट। सो again in the examination it should have been asked as a it should be asked as a short note. Okay, I'll give you 2 minutes, think. Locational triangles have lost their significance in contemporary world. Analyze. Okay. Now, one thing that we have to learn here is that whenever such type of questions are asked, which are statement based questions, ठीक है? So what is the first step? I will read the statement and I have to decide whether I fully agree with the statement or I fully disagree with the statement or I just am partially agreeing, disagreeing with the statement. ठीक है? Once you have decided, you will essentially get your answer. Majority cases में you will be finding that partially you will agree, disagree with the statement. ठीक है? So here again, if I say locational triangles have lost their significance in contemporary world. So I know कि partly it is right, but partly it is also wrong. But for me here, the question is analyze. The secondary keyword is analyze. जब इस तरह की कैटेगरीज होती हैं, लाइक मैं एक डिवीजन करता हूं हमेशा क्वेश्चन को रीड करने में सेकेंडरी कीवर्ड्स को, मेरे हिसाब से देयर इज अ फर्स्ट कैटेगरी कीवर्ड्स, और फर्स्ट कैटेगरी कीवर्ड सबसे सिंपल होते हैं जिसमें यू हैव टू राइट मोस्टली अबाउट व्हाट, ओनली द इंफॉर्मेशन एस्पेक्ट. ठीक है? सो लिस्ट डाउन, व्हाट, इस तरह के जो कीवर्ड्स होते हैं, दैट इज बेसिकली यू डोंट हैव टू एक्सप्लेन देयर. देन कम्स द सेकेंड कैटेगरी कीवर्ड जिसमें what is implicit, but there also comes the explicit becomes why, factor becomes explicit. So explain, etc. Elaborate is also such kind of keyword. Illustrate is another such type of keyword जो सेकेंड कैटेगरी कीवर्ड है. ठीक है? तो यहां पर मेजर फोकस किस पर होना चाहिए? एक्सप्लेनेशन पर. बट यू ऑल्सो हैव टू, एज आई सेड, व्हाट इज ऑल्सो implicit in that. तो थोड़ा सा what aspect पर भी लिखना है. In such type of keywords, even if you don't write the criticism, it will do. There is no need because it has not been asked. Then comes the third category keyword, और थर्ड कैटेगरी के जो कीवर्ड्स होते हैं, दे इंक्लूड वेयर देयर इज ऑल्सो, ये what and why तो है ही है, बट यहां पर with this what is added is you have to write something like advantages, and this becomes explicit. There is also here implicit एक और aspect है, and that is the disadvantages or criticism, whatever you call it, shortcomings. इसका शेयर कैसा होना चाहिए? I believe this should be not more than 20 to 25%. This should be the major part, that is 80 to 75%. ठीक है? And the categories included here are analyze, analysis, discuss, examine, etc. Then there is a fourth category keywords जिसमें अब क्या explicit कर दिया गया है, इसके साथ साथ there is another explicit which has been done, which is critical. So critical account, critically analyze, critically examine. ठीक है? तो difficulty level थोड़ा बढ़ गया यहाँ पर, और very clearly, because this has been exclusively made now very very clear that you have to write, I believe, at least 50% should be criticism. कम से कम 50% critical aspect पर लिखना है. So this is the fourth category keyword. Then finally जो सबसे difficult होते हैं, जिसमें there is lots of thinking involved, there would be keywords like formulate, like question पूछा गया है, formulate a suitable agricultural policy for India. So formulate में बहुत सारे steps होते हैं. You have to become a policy maker. First you will identify the problems and the peculiar characteristics, and then what you will do, then on the basis of that you will suggest solutions. or the policy whatever has been asked. So एक simple सा ये classification है which you can essentially use. So in our question it is analyze. So at least मैं 60% part किस पर लिखूंगा? Lost their significance minimum. ठीक है, 60 to 70%. Then I will also write around 30 to 40% part. I'll write also about how it is still relevant. ठीक है, but कोशिश करो 60 to 70% you have to write how they have lost their significance. So let us see. टेल मी, एक छोटा सा इंट्रोडक्शन. देखो, शॉर्ट नोट्स में सबसे खास बात क्या होती है? टाइम ही नहीं है सोचने का. बिकॉज यू विल गेट 6 minutes. If you have followed the proper timeline, you will not get more than 6 minutes to write a short note, जो 10 markers होते हैं. ठीक है, सो बिल्कुल भी टाइम नहीं है कि थिंक करने के लिए. सो व्हाट आई विल डू, आई विल जस्ट राइट अ वेरी स्मॉल, और इसमें इंट्रोडक्शन और भी छोटा होना चाहिए. सो लोकेशनल triangle were introduced by Weber to explain the localization of industries. Location of industries. So छोटा सा, that's enough. मेन बॉडी, एक और लाइन, फर्दर थोड़ा सा elaboration of what is a locational triangle. So a locational or a location triangle tries to identify what is it is trying to identify? The point of minimum transportation cost. ठीक है, the point or location having minimum transportation cost. ठीक है, for example, tell me, in gross raw materials, it is near to raw material location. You don't need to explain, केवल you have to just draw. So there is market, there is raw material 1, raw material 2, both are gross raw material. Ideally it is located where? ठीक है, तो ये आइडियल हो गया, बट रियल में यू नो it can be, the industry might be actually located towards R1. इसके वेरिएंट्स हैं. It can be near R2. Like for example, आयरन एंड स्टील इंडस्ट्री में हमें क्या दिखाई पड़ता है इंडिया में? इज द इंडस्ट्री ईदर लोकेटेड नियर द सोर्स ऑफ आयरन ओर, और इट इज लोकेटेड नियर द सोर्स ऑफ कोल. ठीक है, सो दीज आर वेरियस वेरिएंट्स जो इसके आइडियल केस के मिलते हैं हमें. सो एक हो गया, 1 पॉइंट. देन इन केस ऑफ प्योर रॉ मटेरियल, इंडस्ट्री or industrial location is determined by other factors than transportation cost. You know, in case of pure raw material, because either wherever you are located, it doesn't affect. So there, rather than transportation cost, it is the other factors, and here it becomes the pull of the market becomes the factor. Or you draw the diagram and show how the pull of the market becomes the primary factor. अब देखो, इसमें मैंने टोटल वर्ड्स कितने यूज किए होंगे? मैक्सिमम 50, and I am more or less able to explain what is a locational triangle. Then, if we talk about applicability of locational or sorry, because the question is about non applicability, so about non applicability or lack of applicability in modern times. So usko pehle likho. Always remember, when you are talking about such scholars, it is better to write the problems इस तरह के क्वेश्चन में पहले जो शॉर्टकमिंग्स हैं, एंड सो दैट यू आर एबल टू प्रेज द स्कॉलर लेटर ऑन. ठीक है? सो नॉन एप्लीकेबिलिटी में what could have been written? Don't you think कि there are definitely there are number of factors? ठीक है? बट वेबर के मॉडल में भी देयर इज अ वेरिएबिलिटी फ्रॉम लोकेशनल ट्रायंगल जो वो एक्सप्लेन करता है. यस और नो? द फैक्टर ऑफ लेबर in recent times, tell me, has the role of raw material further reduced? Number of reasons are there. One, because of improving technology, resource use efficiency has increased. Like for example, in earlier times, to produce same amount of iron and steel, we required 5 to 6 times that of coal. Today we are requiring less, much less. Or compared to earlier, it was 5 to 6 times. Now it is 1. So this much resource efficiency we have achieved because of technological development. ठीक है? So that is one factor. Other factor is the technological improvement has also improved transportation. So overall cost of transportation has declined. So for example, tell me, can you name some examples? Like अगर मैं example दूं, बहुत अच्छा example, has the development of electricity grids played a role in decentralization of some of the industries like textile industries? Yes, it has definitely done so. Okay? So there has been improvement in the transportation technology as well. So overall, what has happened? The role of raw material has declined. ठीक है? तो सब first point में you'll talk about the how role of raw material has declined. Here definitely there should be examples should be used. As a result, now tell me, does the role of other factors will increase? Definitely yes. So labor as a factor. So among the major factor costs, two most important is raw material and the second one is the labor. So if role of raw material is increasing, reducing, then labor will be increasing. Can I give example of made in China? Made in China is a very good example of such declining role where labor has become a very, very crucial factor. Okay? Or several other service based industries in other developing countries shifting, like BPO industry in India. It is also an example where labor role has increased. अदर फैक्टर्स की बात करें, टेल मी, if I talk about the factor of market, so very important problem with the locational triangle concept was, again, it was a classical model. और हमने ऑलरेडी देखा है what are classical models all about. They are based upon the least cost approach. ठीक है, so it was based upon the least cost approach. Weber doesn't place much significance or gives much significance to other factors like market or the demand factor. ठीक है, टेल मी, क्या हमने देखा है कि इन recent times there is a orientation of industries towards the post on the basis of post Fordism principle? Have I talked about this? Yes or no? So post Fordism principle, where we see that there is more industries are becoming more market oriented. ठीक है, so again I can talk about this. Other factors also are playing role in industrial location. Like for example, इसको क्योंकि देखो हमारे पास स्पेस कम है तो हम सारे नहीं लिख सकते हैं, ये याद रखना है. सो अदर फैक्टर्स में you will take as an example like behavioral factors. बिहेवियरल फैक्टर्स, अब यहां पर मैंने कोशिश की है कि सारे एंगल्स दिखा दूं. बिहेवियरल ह्यूमनिज्म का भी एक क्रिटिसिज्म का आ गया. ठीक है, सो इफ यू टॉक अबाउट द बिहेवियरल फैक्टर्स, टेल मी, do we see today that there is emergence of MNCs, multinational corporations? Now, does multinational corporations have greater capacity to take the risks? Yes or no? They are very large enterprises with huge capital. And does they have greater capacity to take the risks? Yes, compared to the regional and local industries. Now, does this means that they can take more risky decisions like locating an industry in other country? Yes or no? So, does the behavioral factor is also very important in explaining the phenomena of delocalization of industries, which is taking place in the world? I hope you know what is delocalization. It is the shifting of industries towards developing countries. ठीक है? So, behavioral factors are also important in the contemporary phenomena like delocalization of industries. दो term होते हैं, deindustrialization and delocalization. Sometimes they are loosely interchanged. But more technically speaking, deindustrialization is a phenomena where the manufacturing sector is replaced by the service sector. ठीक है? That is what we call it as deindustrialization. Accompanied with deindustrialization is a phenomena referred to as delocalization. So delocalization of industries means industries shifting to new areas, which can be within the developed countries, some less developed areas of developed countries, or towards developing countries. ठीक है? So I have given one framework where I'll show that how it is less applicable in the contemporary world, and a short examples of how we still find that there is still applicability. So tell me, can we say the applicability of Weber's model, can it be seen still in terms of particularly some heavy manufacturing industries? Yes or no? heavy manufacturing industries, and even contemporary examples if we see. Like for example, if I take iron and steel industry, the recent change in the location of iron and steel industries is that of becoming more coast based locations. Yes or no? This is the most recent shift. So, if you talk about coast based location, can I say again, can it be proved with respect to the locational triangle? Yes or no? It can be proved with respect to the locational triangle. Like, for example, if you talk about, if I talk about the Vishakhapatnam iron and steel plant. Okay. So, here the R1 is Bailadila mines of Chhattisgarh, and R2, which is coal, is coming from where? From Sydney, Australia. From here it is coming. So, here lies M, that is market, which is Japan, China. ठीक है? So, still we find, particularly in those raw materials where there is heavy gross materials, raw materials are involved, we still find that there is clearly applicability. Okay. और देखो, कभी कभी क्या होता है ना कि इन आवर शॉर्ट नोट्स पर्टिकुलरली हमारे पास कंटेंट ज्यादा है, स्पेस कम है. ठीक है? तो टेल मी, जो मैंने लास्ट में लिखा, डोंट यू थिंक दैट इट वाज अ काइंड ऑफ कंक्लूजन आल्सो? ठीक है? सो बहुत ज्यादा टाइम वेस्ट नहीं करना है कि वी आर सो मच वरीड कि कंक्लूजन लिखा नहीं लिखा. इट इज ऑल इन अ वे, इट इज अ काइंड ऑफ कंक्लूजन. मूविंग ऑन. Now, if you look into Rostov's model of stages of growth, so if you look into the previous year questions, critically examine the stages. Direct question, illustrate your answers with suitable examples. ये आ चुका है. Explain the necessary conditions of takeoff and subsequent stages of development of a nation as propounded by Rostov. Then outline briefly the age of mass consumption described by Rostov in his multi-stage theory of growth. So it was asked as a short note. That means you should be in a position essentially to write all the 5 stages. You should be in a position to write a 150 words answer. ठीक है? They have already given us indication. देख सकते हो कि लास्ट में 2018 में पूछा गया है. 3 years have passed by. They don't have too many models and theories to ask. So there is a chance that it can be repeated. Okay. So one question which can be repeated is the critique of Rostov's stages of growth model. I'll give you 2 minutes, think and write. Okay. So the question is very clearly write a critique of Rostov's stages of growth model. At least, as I have told you, minimum 50% of your answer should be the critique, excluding introduction conclusion. ठीक है? So इसमें अगर हम आंसर का स्ट्रक्चर पहले बना लें, मेन बॉडी का स्ट्रक्चर पहले बनाते हैं. What should be the main body? Around there will be three parts of the main body. One is the model explanation, which should not go beyond, if you talk about 25%. Then there should be the criticism, which should be ranging between 50 to 60% on depending on how much you can write. And the last part is a little bit of appraisal, although it is not asked. If you want, you can use this third part also as a conclusion. Remember that conclusion is a space where you can go beyond what has been asked. Okay? To show your wisdom. So here you will write the uh, appraisal of the theory. You praise the theory, what he has done. So अगर रोस्टोव का मॉडल पढ़ा है तो you must be aware about few things. I have given it here in more pictorial form. Essentially, I believe the only way to write the theory in 25% is to use a pictorial format. That is the only way you will be able to write it. ठीक है? So any of these, बहुत सारे मैंने दिए हैं, वो यूज कर सकते हो. एक मैंने स्पेशली यहाँ पर दिया है chart. On the next page you will be finding. Please read this chart properly for the Rostov's 5-stage model. This chart will be useful for you to answer if suppose short notes on these stages are asked. Okay? So he has very clearly, although his main concern is the economic growth, as the model name suggests, but he has also suggested what will be the changes which will take place overall in the society along with that economic growth. What will be the factors which will be determinative factors, like what will be the kind of economic growth, society, polity, technology, innovation, industry, investment. ठीक है? तो इसके लिए कुछ और पढ़ने की जरूरत नहीं है. यू ऑलरेडी नो व्हाट इज द रोस्टो मॉडल. बस ये चार्ट याद कर लो. एनी क्वेश्चन ऑफ सच टाइप यू विल बी एबल टू एसेंशियली आंसर. ठीक है? सो moving on to, I'm directly here moving on to the criticism part. So if you talk about the criticism of the Rostov model, very important thing is that Rostov model was essentially which type of model? An inductive model. It is essentially an inductive model, which was developed on the basis or experience of which world? The first world countries. Okay? So it essentially was based upon the experience of the first world countries. And what has happened? It has been some, according to critics, it has been unnecessarily transformed into a universal or universally applicable model. Universally applicable model. And in this, what happens? Countries are tried to be fit in. tried to be fit in. You can take the example of India. India. So tell me, can we say India, can we fit India into, if you take the number of people involved in or total employment given? From the perspective of total employment given, can we say India is still in the preconditions to take off? Yes or no? Obviously, yes. When it comes to the share in GDP, for example, then can we say the which sector share in GDP, can we say it would lie in drive towards maturity? Services sector is one of the dominant sector in the Indian economy. So still it is lying in drive towards maturity from that perspective. So very clearly what we are trying to do, we are trying to essentially fit in many of the countries who do not, who have their different geographical history, they have their own, if you talk about cultural history, they have been trying to be fit in. So that is one issue with this model. Second is, second line of if you talk about criticism, lies along the theoretical weaknesses. Theoretical weaknesses in the model. So what is the main theoretical weakness in the Rostow model? Very important thing is that he has organized his model in the form of stages. Form of stages. So you know very well, he has used the term stages of economic growth. Stages of economic growth. Okay. Now, if you talk about these stages, what is the parameter? Is the parameter to classify countries in these stages is very loosely defined. Is very loosely defined. As we said in the previous point, he just tries to fit in the countries. So it is very, very loosely defined. And he gives, in fact, several of these parameters. And when he tries to classify the country, he uses without any regularity any of these and classifies the country in each of them. Okay? So this is one big problem in the model. Now, from this concept of stage, several other questions which are arising. Okay? So if suppose we take what he was talking about, the parameters, and parameter is, main parameter he talks about is the economic activity. Economic activity. So many scholars have opined that the concept of stage carries a significance of system change. When there is stage change, there is also a system change. ठीक है? Now, if you look from this perspective, some scholars are of the opinion that the model should have only 3 stages. It should have only 3 stages. In the traditional society, the dominance is of primary sector. Primary sector. In the other, if you talk about 3, that is the preconditions to take off, and drive towards maturity. In general, they should be characterized as the secondary sector. in them what is happening, there is no system change seen. From when there is gradual stage, what he's saying, are changing, there is no such system change taking place. And finally, there should be age of high mass consumption, which is based upon the tertiary sector. ठीक है? So if he wanted to highlight these also, the difference, there are differences, they should have been used as, the term should have been used as phases rather than stage. In his writing, if you read, you'll find that Rostow interchangeably uses the term stages and phases. ठीक है? He has loosely used the term stages and phases, which carries a significance that he probably didn't differentiate between what is a stage and what is a phase. ठीक है? दोनों में बहुत डिफरेंस है. क्वेश्चन में भी अगर आता है, सपोज these two terms, there are differences. You have studied about Davis and Penck. Penck deliberately used the term phase rather than stage, because in stage there is what? There is a idea of sequential development involved. There is a fixed way in which the movement will be taking place. In phase, it is not so. It is not so much rigid term as the stage. So Rostov, if you talk about, he has, as I said, he has loosely used the words stage and phase. So that is another shortcoming of Rostov. Now, when he is using the term stage, one more thing is not clear. And there is a dilemma with respect to one more thing. And this dilemma is that, are these stages inevitable? Are these stages inevitable, or there can be variety? Variety. So if we read carefully, we find that the first three stages, what how he is writing, the first three stages are inevitable. If any country wants to develop, it would have to follow the first three stages. ठीक है? Variability arrives from where? In the last two. In the last two. So he accept that after this, the countries can choose models of development. But still, what happens? He still insists. He still insists that the natural course of history, he uses the word the sweep of history. So the natural course of history, or the natural course will be the sweep of history. Of history. Now, what does this means? The sweep of history means he is in a way implying that it becomes automatic. It becomes automatic that countries would reach towards the age of high mass consumption. They would be reaching to the age of high mass consumption. But again, you can very clearly see that we find that not all the countries are essentially or would be reaching to the age of high mass consumption. For example, think, इसका एक example देते हैं. Take the case of China, and if we compare it with any developed countries like suppose USA, can we say in case of USA, this is the resource base and this is the population base, population size. Can here be the case of high mass consumption achieved? Yes or no? There can be large amount of welfare. But in case of a country like China, what we are finding, the resource base is smaller. It is smaller. Population base, on the other hand, becomes bigger. So even if China reaches to the same level of technological development as US, can I say, will it, tell me, will it be able to achieve the same level of welfare? Definitely not, because there the geography is different, the history is different. So, very clearly, in reality, the automatism which he is talking about, his automatic, it is like a compound growth. He is using the concept of compound growth, that it will continue to grow, continue to grow. It doesn't happen in reality. Realities are very much, they can be varied, defined by the peculiar geography and history of a particular region. ठीक है? So this is another problem in the Rostov model of economic growth. And then you can also write about the Marxist criticism. इसके बारे में मैंने आई थिंक पहले भी बताया. So नहीं बताया. Okay, I think it was somewhere else I was discussing. So Marxist criticism की बात करें तो what was the basic Marxist criticism? It is criticized that essentially what was the main motive of Rostov? What was the primary motive of Rostov? To establish a general historical theory. General historical theory to counter the Das Capital or the historical materialism theory of Marx. Okay, so there was no such general theory which existed which explained how the progression will be taking place. अभी हमने मार्क्स में देखा था how the progression was occurring from primitive communism to feudalism to capitalism and ultimately again to the communism. So basically he wanted to counter this historical materialist theory. Why there was need to counter it? Because we were in the era of Cold War. There was ongoing politics of the Cold War. And you know, in Cold War, there were two camps which were present. Both of the camps were trying to lure the newly developed nations into each of the camps. So, definitely, the Marxists had a historical growth theory where they could tell that this happens in Europe. If you follow, this is the problem that would be taking place. But the capitalists didn't had anything to counter. So thus Rostov formulated this model, a historical model to counter the historical materialist idea of or the theory of Marx. Okay? So this is another criticism. So it was based upon a predetermined idea, and that is why all the inconsistencies that we see in the model emerge. Okay? So that is another criticism which you will be talking about. And finally, as I said, you'll write about the appraisal. So tell me, can we say that despite all the shortcomings, particularly more related with the details, one thing is very clear, that if you look into the development of the economies, do they actually follow some of the models or some of the stages of Rostow model? Take the example of China. So we can say that China is today in drive towards maturity. Okay. Before that, the period, if you talk about the period of 1970s, 80s, and so on, it was the takeoff stage for China, particularly if you talk about the 70s and 80s period, when manufacturing was so much emphasized. Manufacturing became the most important growing sector of the economy. But can I say that before that, there was a very distinct period of the preconditions to take off? What is the characteristic of preconditions to take off? Tell me. Very important characteristic is that during this period, the primary sector is converted into a kind of industrial enterprise. That means the main investment goes where? In the primary sector. So during this period, agriculture is transformed into the subsistence agriculture. It is transformed into commercial form of agriculture. In this period, there is lots of investment being done in the other primary sectors like mining. So you will be finding that there was a period of 50s and 60s when China embarked upon its agricultural reforms. It essentially used the cooperative farming system to do the agricultural reforms. Take the example of India. After independence, what we did? First thing, Nehru wanted to do, develop India into an industrial nation. Okay. Essentially, what happened? We had no other choice in the first plan because there was lots of food crisis. So if you have read, there was use of Harrod Domer model, and the main investment was where? In agriculture sector mein gaya. That was the primary sector of investment. So the industrialization process was postponed. In fact, not only that, our leaders were aware that they had to transform the primary sector first to make sure that the resources are available for the secondary sector. So what happened? There was, when we did our land reforms, can I say it was the same period? The land reforms were attempted, other agricultural reforms were tried to be done, but even before reaching a level of reforms, can we say in the second plan itself we embarked upon the industrialization, or essentially the takeoff stage आ गया सीधा हमारा second plan से ही आ गया in the Nehru Manlowis model. Ideally, what should have happened? We should have achieved a kind of a level of agricultural reforms, land reforms, but वो हमने achieve नहीं किया और सीधे we launched the takeoff stage. Are we paying the price for it even now? Definitely, in a way. We still find that our manufacturing is not so much developed. Our agriculture still suffers from a very similar type of weaknesses. It is still largely subsistence type in major parts of India. Okay, so there is a policy implication related with the Rostow model, and there is also a framework through which, at least not perfectly, but at least it helps in understanding the development process which has occurred in many developing countries of the world. Okay, so that is what you can write essentially in the appraisal. Moving on, question number 8. Illustrate the shortcomings of heartland theory, taking into example the contemporary geopolitics. ओके, अब देखो, हियर द की वर्ड इज shortcomings of heartland theory, taking examples from contemporary geopolitics. और shortcomings को explain करना है. You have to not explain, explain plus, actually here there is word illustrate. So what is the meaning of the term illustrate? It means explain with examples. Illustrate का सीधा मतलब होता है explain with examples. So it is explain with examples. Although क्वेश्चन में एग्जाम्पल्स अलग से भी मैंने डाल दिया था. नाउ वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट थिंग विल बी कि कितने पॉइंट्स यहां पर जनरेट करते हो. ठीक है, और नो डाउट इसमें एक एंगल मैंने ऐड कर दिया है विथ कंटेम्पररी जियो पॉलिटिक्स. बट स्टिल टेल मी, कैन आई से कि बेस्ट आंसर वही लिखेगा और द मोस्ट मार्क्स फेचिंग आंसर वही लिखेगा जिसको सारे वो क्रिटिसिज्म याद होंगे जो बेसिक हम पढ़ते हैं? यस और नो? So does there is a role of rectification here? Very very strong role. वो देखने में कैसा भी लग रहा हो क्वेश्चन, अगर आपने rectification नहीं कर रखा है तो you'll write less point, you'll get less marks. So keep this very clearly in mind. ठीक है, like for example, let us start. So if we talk about this question, introduction, you can use to write anything like एक तो इंट्रोडक्शन ये हो सकता है कि वी जस्ट स्टार्ट वेरी सिंपल अबाउट द थ्योरी, जिसमें मैंने बता दिया ज्योग्राफिकल पाइवोट ऑफ हिस्ट्री, नाम बता दिया. दैट कैन बी वन टाइप ऑफ इंट्रोडक्शन. ठीक है, अनदर कैन बी अ मोर डायनेमिक इंट्रोडक्शन रिलेटेड विद द कंटेम्पररी सिनेरियो. सो फॉर एग्जांपल, कैन आई से विथ द emergence of East Asia becoming the, or East Asia gradually becoming the second pole of geopolitics, Mackinder's heartland theory or theories, relevance has been questioned or has been criticized in the or like, has been criticized. So something like this, directly to the point, जो पूछा गया है केवल उससे related. Then coming to the main body, here you will use the space around 25% of the main body to explain the heartland theory. Or I am not going into this. I would definitely need the map, जरूर होना चाहिए, जिसमें दो लाइनें बहुत क्लियरली दिखानी है. The earlier heartland which was mainly associated with Russia, and later when he made modification in 1918, addition of the Eastern Europe also as a part of heartland. So expansion of heartland. ये दोनों जरूरी है, मैप के अंदर ही दिखाओ. ठीक है. Then you start with the criticism. So tell me, number of criticisms we can talk about. For example, one of the major criticism of Mackinder is that he oversimplified history. He was oversimplifying history. And what was his history all about? As the struggle. He saw history of the world as a struggle between land and sea based forces. Land and sea based forces. So, in the Columbian era, there was more dominance. It was becoming more dominance of the sea based forces were becoming more dominant. But Mackinder could see that land based forces are going to dominate now. So he was simplifying history in this manner. Tell me, today, can we say that it has become in the contemporary geopolitics, it has become even more redundant, this idea? Yes or no? If we look into the modern uh, scenario, where is all the geopolitics taking place? Tell me. Can we say, is it taking place in the area around Mediterranean, Black Sea? वहां पे चल रहा है? Yes or no? Others like, for example, South China Sea, there it is going on. Presently, if you look into, the struggle is between USA and China. Tell me, are both of these characterized by large land based resources? Plus both of them have high maritime mobility. दोनों चीजें हैं उनके पास. ठीक है. So again, that is one problem which is there. Then दूसरे पे आते हैं. He wrongfully equated size with resource base. ठीक है. So one thing which he did wrongfully, equated size with resource base. ठीक है. अब यहां पर you can definitely talk about, if we look into the contemporary world, even today, despite the dismantling of Soviet Union, tell me, can we say Russia is still the largest country of the world? Yes or no? So despite the dismantling of the Soviet Union, Russia is still the largest country. Largest country. Now tell me, we already know जो किताब में लिखा हुआ है कि but it is characterized by so much extreme climate, so much hardships. ठीक है? In contemporary world, are we facing the problem of global warming? Yes or no? Are we facing the problem of global warming? And one of the areas which would be most affected with global warming would be the this Siberian region is going to be one of the area which is going to be most affected, and it would be facing number of type of difficulties. For example, one idea was that the resources will open up, but there will be these many of these areas are periglacial periglacial landscapes. ठीक है? Most of these periglacial landscapes, tell me, will they develop thermokarst conditions वहां पे बन जाएंगी? There will be development of thermokarst condition. Thermokarst conditions कौन सी conditions होती हैं कि suppose करो like this kind of lots of lakes would be created, and that means even if the land opens up, it would be characterized still by several type of difficulties. For example, it wouldn't be very useful for agriculture. It would be a more of a wasteland. So one thing is clear, that that problem which was there in Macinder's idea, it is still the problem. It doesn't mean that it will be solved. Then if you talk about third point, in Macinder's idea, his basic concept is the case of geographical pivot. Geographical pivot. ठीक है? Now tell me, what is geographical pivot? Can we say geographical pivot is the price, that trophy which everyone wants to achieve? It is the thing for which the fight is going on. In fact, in his model, this geographical pivot is essentially the heartland. And heartland has a fixed geographical location. It has a fixed geographical location. But tell me, as has been written by Rimland theory, it also uses the concept of pivot area, ठीक है, for which the fight is taking place. The pivot area concept is also used by it. But for rimland, the pivot area is not the heartland, it is what? It is the rimland. Which has both, rimland की characteristic क्या है? It has both land resource plus the maritime mobility. Maritime mobility. Now tell me, can we say contemporary much of the geopolitics which is ongoing, is it occurring in the rimland? Yes or no? Whether you talk about the Southwest Asia, even Eastern Europe was originally not part of the heartland. What, if you talk about Mackinder, had to do? He had to keep on modifying his theory to include the contemporary changes of that time which were taking place. So, Eastern Europe, or if you talk about another area, is South Asia, East Asia, which includes your China Sea, या फिर Japan Sea, all of these were the main geopolitics is essentially going on. ठीक है? So if you talk about very clearly the pivot area, what we see, इसकी fixed location की जो का जो idea है, is it wrong or no? The geographical pivots in the history, if we look into, they have kept on shifting positions. ठीक है? So geographical pivots have kept on shifting their positions. So that is one problem of the theory. अब फिक्स्ड एक हो गया. दूसरा प्रॉब्लम क्या है इस मॉडल में? दिस टर्म ऑल्सो इज अ मॉडल, जोग्राफिकल. ठीक है? सो जोग्राफिकल पाइवोट. टेल मी टुडे, इफ यू टॉक अबाउट, कैन वी से that the geopolitics of the world is being fought not only in geographical space but other space as well? Yes or no? It is being fought today also in economic space. Economic space is another area where it is being fought. The geopolitics. For example, tell me, if we take the example of economic space, can we say the currency wars are an example of this economic space? Is there a fight going on between the larger countries with respect to the dominance of the currency? Can we say, are Russia and China fighting very hard to ensure the dismantling of the dominance of dollar as the main currency of the world? Yes or no? So definitely this limitation, geographical limitation, the term geographical pivot which he uses, it limits the theory with respect to application to areas or spaces where the other geopolitics or the geopolitics is going on in other spaces. Similarly, tell me, is there cyberspace also where there is lots of geopolitics going on? Yes or no? Can we say there is today a fight for the control of internet? Control of internet, which is today controlled by which country? It is mainly United States. The West has the main control of the internet. But do we find that there are kind of several cyber wars, several type of viruses? There is so many allegations that many of the viruses that they have origin in Russia and China. ठीक है? So this conception of here, one, there is fixed geographical, this geographical pivot has a fixed location. That is also limiting the theory. We see, if we read the history, we find that pivots have been clearly shifting. And second, if you talk about the term geographical also limits the theory. So that is another aspect of this. Then clearly another shortcoming was with respect to the neglect of the role of technology. He very clearly in his theory neglected the role of technology. Very clearly वो क्या कहता है? He, in his theory, he is talking about, for example, when he is talking about the Heartland. Heartland was what? It was a fortress which is surrounded. Why it is like a fortress? Very safe area, because it is surrounded on all sides by mountains. In the north, it is a frozen Arctic Ocean which is present. Okay? There is only a narrow corridor which is present south of Ural, in between Caspian Sea and Ural, which is a little bit weak underbelly, which is acknowledged. Okay. So can we say that he didn't had the much faith in the, he didn't visualize how the technology would evolve essentially. And thus later on, he had to further modify, he himself had to modify his theory. And He could see what was happening in the Second World War, and in Second World War, how the fighter planes played a very, very important role. And thus, in 1940s, when he came up with his last major modification of the theory, he came up with the idea, kaun sa tha? One was the Midland Basin and the German Realm. So there was, he further talked about the Midland Basin and the German Realm, which were fighting with each other. In fact, uh, Russian Realm, sorry, the Soviet Realm. And in between was the buffer zone of Germany. Okay? But tell me, can we say presently, if we talk about, has there been so much development of technology, particularly war related technology? Are we in an era where we are also talking about satellite warfare? So, in such a scenario, the modifications, because he was using geography as a limitation to explain history, how geography provided limits, which explained the, if you talk about the historical scenarios. But today, can we say that the level of technology development is very, very fast? And if you look into, hardly there is place for the further improvement of the theory. ठीक है? So again, you can talk about this role of technology using some examples. So likewise, तुम्हें क्या करना है? जो criticism पढ़ रखा है, just you use the current examples and you talk about that. But फिर से मैं बता रहा हूँ कि it depends upon how many criticisms you remember. Like for example, अभी एक मैंने छोड़ दिया. You have to also talk about that. So, for example, his entire theory was based upon Mercator projection. That is also one of the criticism. Today, do we have a better understanding of how the world is? Yes or no? We have better understanding. There is satellites which are constantly, if you talk about GPS technologies. So very clearly today the understanding has further improved. Okay, moving on, question number 9 पर आते हैं. Russian invasion of Ukraine has once again testified to the contemporary relevance of Rimland theory. Express your views. I'll give you 2 minutes. Okay. Now, in this question, there is, I have asked with respect to Rimland. बट ये हर्टलैंड भी हो सकता है, ठीक है, क्योंकि देखो ज्यादा डिफरेंस नहीं है इफ यू टॉक अबाउट हर्टलैंड एंड रिमलैंड. And you know, as we said in the later phase, heartland theory also included this area, Eastern Europe, as a part of heartland. So उस तरह से भी क्वेश्चन आ सकता है, बट ज्यादा रेलेवेंट है कि वी ट्रीट इट एज अ रीमलैंड. नाउ सो फर्स्ट ऑफ ऑल इसमें स्ट्रक्चर क्या होगा? इंट्रोडक्शन, यू कैन जस्ट राइट दैट the Ukraine war has brought the war has brought to focus that the Cold War politics, which was essentially based upon the Rimland theory ideas, is still not dead. Is still not dead. Okay, so something like this introduction you can start with, and then you move on to the main body. अब देखो main body में there should be number of things. So first part, which can be around 20%, you write about the Ukraine crisis. Ukraine crisis. So again, the events, if you talk about starting from 2002, the major event was 2014, and finally the crisis which occurred in 2021, है ना? Late 21. So you write about this, then you move on to write the main part of the question which has been asked, how the theory has become relevant. So tell me, the Ukraine war, can we say it is it manifestation, or can it be seen as a manifestation of the fact that USA is trying to make sure that there is no unification of the rimland? Yes or no? That was the advocacy of Spikeman, that there is no unification of the rimland, which essentially is very clearly the rest of, जो अगर हम रशिया को छोड़ दें तो जो सोवियत यूनियन कंट्रीज वर, they were part of that rimland countries. Okay, so now tell me, the expansion of NATO का जो क्वेश्चन है, it should be seen in this context. It should be very clearly seen in this context that they are trying to do what? They are trying to make sure that it is not unified. ठीक है? And number of things have happened. It is very similar to what was happening in, for example, Cold War में देखते हैं. So in Cold War, tell me, there was a kind of doctrine which was there, Monroe Doctrine जिसको बोलते हैं. What was Monroe Doctrine? Monroe Doctrine evolved essentially was following the Cuban Missile Crisis. Cuban Missile Crisis. And what was this Cuban Missile Crisis? You know, missiles were placed in Cuba. So that led to declaration of this Monroe Doctrine. And there was a kind of what? There was a kind of agreement between the two world powers of that time that they will not involve in the sphere of influence of each other. ठीक है? sphere of influence will should not be disturbed of each other. But starting with the late 90s में क्या हुआ? Late 1990s में, other countries which were part of the Soviet Union like Romania, they became NATO member. So one invasion, and this continued further eastward, and next comes कौन सा आता है? Ukraine. So what NATO forces try to do, they try to convert Ukraine also into their realm. And all those, if you talk about that Shevchenko and all those, the politics which was already going on, ultimately Russia had no other choice but to react. Russia had long held the Monroe Doctrine. They were not invading into the area of US, the sphere of influence of US. So essentially what has happened? Now Russia had no other choice but to invade in Ukraine. Russia saw very clearly the case where they are trying to invade into their sphere of influence area. ठीक है? So again, tell me, Monroe Doctrine was framed in a particular framework of Cold War, which was very clearly the outcome of the Rimland theory, ideas of Rimland theory. And it was again repeated here. The US should have held that Monroe Doctrine also for Russia. The same principle should have been obeyed, but they didn't do. And they invaded into, they tried to convert Ukraine also to NATO. Ultimately, Russia was very, very clear that it was invasion into its own sphere of influence. It considers it as its own sphere of influence, and thus there is this war. So, one thing is very clear from this, that US is still trying to make sure that the countries which are located in the rimland, they are not unified, or you can say the NATO or the West, they are trying to still make sure that they are not unified. And again, if you talk about this, can be seen as this kind of scenario is emerging. But देखो, इसमें कुछ shortcomings भी हम लिख सकते हैं. Can we say that if you actually analyze the contemporary geopolitics, it is not so much simple. It is not so much simple application of the rimland idea. ठीक है? Because, tell me, can we say that today Russia is no more the second pole of the world? Yes or no? It is no more the second pole of the world. The second pole is now becoming China. It has now become China. So rather than this, like in the rimland theory, very clearly it was between USA and Russia. Today it is between USA and China, where Russia has assumed which type of role? A secondary role to China. SCO में बहुत clear है. If you look into the organization of SCO, China is the main initiator, and Russia has in a way assumed a secondary kind of role. So it has become what? It is still, we can say, the principles which were there, they are still applicable. But the exact scenarios, the geography has very clearly changed. It is no more Russia which has remained the second pole of the world. So it has become a more complex relationship. But still, one thing is very clear. Today, it has become, or it is more like it was. जो प्रिंसिपल अभी भी है वो प्रिंसिपल कौन सा है? It is containment of communism. This was the main principle of the Rimland theory. They wanted to contain communism. And in that context, it becomes very necessary that the areas, communism के दो core areas हैं, Russia and China. So the areas surrounding them, they don't become communist countries. ठीक है? Okay. इतनी देर के बाद दिमाग बंद होने लगता है. Question number 10. Present a classification of frontiers and boundaries. So I think इसका भी question near recent में पूछा गया है. So you can see boundaries are important in geopolitics. Explain what issues develop from the inclusionary and exclusionary aspects of borders. So इस पे क्वेश्चन मैंने एक्चुअली में टेस्ट में पूछा था, एकदम सेम क्वेश्चन. आई हैड आस्क्ड दिस क्वेश्चन, सो अगेन ये आ गया इस बार. एंड this means that the chance of question being asked from the frontiers and boundaries should be less. But अगर देखोगे तो 2020 में भी हमने ऐसा ही सोचा था. So in modern world, most of the frontiers have been replaced by boundaries. Explain the reason. So can you see there was a question asked in 2020 and mostly we were expecting कि नहीं आएगा. But again there was a question in 2021. So पूछा जा सकता है. बट मैं यहाँ पर एक बात जरूर स्ट्रेस करना चाहूंगा. आई जस्ट ट्राई टू स्ट्रेस वन थिंग. वंस यू हैव डन फर्स्ट लेवल ऑफ योर प्रिपरेशन, ठीक है, एक बार जब प्रिपरेशन हो गई, नेक्स्ट स्टेज में व्हेन यू आर गोइंग फॉर द रिवीजन, इट इज मोर लॉजिकल टू एलिमिनेट द एटलीस्ट द क्वेश्चंस व्हिच वर आस्क्ड लास्ट ईयर, द टॉपिक्स जो पूछे गए थे लास्ट ईयर. सपोज रिपीटिशन होता भी है तो कितनों का होगा? एक क्वेश्चन का होगा, मैक्सिमम दो का होगा. ऐसा तो है नहीं कि पिछले साल का ही पेपर उठा करके दे देगा. इट इज नॉट गोइंग टू हैपन. ठीक है, जस्ट फॉर वन क्वेश्चन और टू क्वेश्चन अगर मैं अपना एनर्जी, क्योंकि अगर देखोगे तो देर आर सो मेनी क्वेश्चन टॉपिक्स विच आर बीइंग आस्क्ड विच विल अमाउंट टू ऑलमोस्ट योर 15% ऑफ द सिलेबस. ठीक है, तो अब उस एक क्वेश्चन के लिए मैं फिर से दोबारा से उतनी एनर्जी लगा के वो 15% को प्रिपेयर करूं, आई थिंक इट इज नॉट अ वेरी वाइज आइडिया. ठीक है, तो एक बार फर्स्ट लेवल ऑफ रीडिंग हो गई, व्हेन आई एम श्योर दैट इफ आई एम सरप्राइज आई विल बी एबल टू राइट समथिंग. एट द लेवल ऑफ कंसोलिडेशन फोकस यू कैन एलिमिनेट दोज टॉपिक्स. ठीक है, बट स्टिल दो तरह के क्वेश्चंस जो पूछे जा सकते हैं. वन इज द क्लासिफिकेशन ऑफ फ्रंटियर्स एंड बाउंड्रीज, and second one is the illustrate the laws of international boundaries and frontiers. ठीक है, और क्लासिफिकेशन में आई हैव गिवन यू मटेरियल. सो फ्रंटियर्स को भी कई तरीके से क्लासिफाई किया जाता है. सो यू कैन स्टार्ट विथ व्हाट आर फ्रंटियर्स एंड बाउंड्रीज. डेफिनेशन के साथ स्टार्ट किया बिकॉज इट इज अ वेरी सिंपल क्वेश्चन. एंड हियर टाइप्स ऑफ फ्रंटियर्स लिखा है, यू कैन जस्ट यूज द वर्ड क्लासिफिकेशन ऑफ द फ्रंटियर्स. और अगर मैं इसके एग्जांपल्स बताऊं, फर्स्ट देखो, number of classifications are actually given here. So frontiers, you know already difference between boundaries and frontiers, I expect this much. So first point, political and settlement frontiers. So ये जो classification है, it is based on the relationship. लिख लो इसको. This first one, these are two type of frontiers which are classified. What is the basis of this classification? It is based upon in relation to sovereign territory of state. In relation to the sovereign territory of state. ठीक है. So you can see there will be two type of frontiers: political frontiers and the settlement frontiers. So political frontiers determine the limits of a state according to the expansion and reduction in area due to political aggressions like invasion, war, etc. So those areas which have been invaded because of the political aggression, that is political frontiers which have been created. While expansion of settlement without any political aggression of settlement into areas which were uninhabited, that is basically what, that is a settlement frontier. ठीक है. So for example, expansion of Russian state into Kazakhstan in the past was associated with it was a type of political frontier, while interiors of Australia which were uninhabited, so colonization of that part was a settlement frontier. ठीक है. So that is one. Then second, so the basis of the second is in relation to the indigenous population of the frontier zone. In relation to the indigenous population of the frontier zone. ठीक है. So with respect to this basis, there can be two type of frontiers: frontiers of inclusion and frontiers of exclusion. So you see, frontiers of inclusion are associated with the assimilation of indigenous population in the areas over which frontier passes. They are assimilated into that, like the Roman and the Arab frontiers. While the second one, segregation, is characterized by frontiers of exclusion, where there is segregation taking place. So, for example, in case of the North America, the Boer frontiers, all these were examples of such frontiers, where the indigenous people were either removed or killed. They were essentially not given part, or they were not assimilated. You know, West talks about terrorism. Okay. I don't think the world has seen such kind of mass killing which actually happened in Americas. It was atrocious. It was so much bad situation. So many people were killed. Entire natives were almost eliminated. So that is what, that is a frontiers of exclusion. Then third की बात करते हैं. Third, if you talk about the basis, is in relation to the pace of frontier advance. Pace of frontier advance. So on the basis of that, देख सकते हो दो frontiers उसमें लिखे हुए हैं, dynamic frontiers and static frontiers. Two type of frontiers are mentioned. So dynamic frontiers कौन से होते हैं? Which are constantly moving into the new areas. ठीक है. Tell me, can we say in the modern world will there be dynamic frontiers? Definitely not. There won't be such dynamic frontiers in the modern world. Static frontiers are the ones whose advancement is checked naturally, because frontiers are more natural phenomena. So by some environmental barriers or effective resistance by the indigenous people. Okay? So such type of frontiers are referred to as the static frontiers. Fourth पर आते हैं, एक और classification है. In relation to, the basis here is in relation to the degree of trans-frontier contact. Degree of trans-frontier contact. So here you can see frontiers of contact is one type. It would facilitate peaceful intercourse between states along the frontier. इसमें इंडिया नेपाल का जो तराई रीजन है, it is a very good example of the frontier of contact. Then there is frontier of separation, which will involve zone of difficult terrain and scarce population. ठीक है, which will minimize the contact between two people. Historically speaking, Sahara Desert, if you talk about, was such kind of frontier. ठीक है. Similarly, other harsh areas, they would also be such kind of frontiers which would stop the contact. Like for example, can we say that Himalayas have also been such kind of barrier? This is the reason south of Himalayas you will be finding there is a distinct Indic culture, and north there is a distinct Chinese culture. Although there have been passages through the passes which has led to some mixing, but the mixing is still, if we can say that, it is less. ठीक है. So again, this is the frontier of कॉन्टैक्ट एंड फ्रंटियर ऑफ सेपरेशन. सो ये चार तरह के क्लासिफिकेशंस हमें फ्रंटियर्स में दिखाई पड़ते हैं. बाउंड्रीज को सबको पता है क्लासिफिकेशन, तो आई डोंट थिंक आई नीड टू इलैबोरेट ऑन दैट. फ्रंटियर वाला जो क्लासिफिकेशन है वो बुक में नहीं मिलता है, जो कॉमन बुक्स हैं. सो दैट इज व्हाई आई हैव गिवन यू. ठीक है. ओके, नाउ मूविंग ऑन टू आवर लास्ट क्वेश्चन. इलस्ट्रेट द लॉज ऑफ इंटरनेशनल बाउंड्रीज एंड फ्रंटियर्स. देखो, इसको मैं शॉर्ट में बता देता हूं बिकॉज दिस इज वेरी बिग. ठीक है, इसके लिए मैंने अभी कोई मटेरियल नहीं दिया हुआ है बिकॉज इट इज अ हैंड रिटन मटीरियल और बहुत गंदी हैंड राइटिंग में, मेरी हैंड राइटिंग में लिखा हुआ है. सो आई जस्ट फर्स्ट गेट इट टाइप्ड एंड गिव यू. नाउ बाउंड्रीज, हमारे सिलेबस में अगर देखोगे तो टॉपिक है लॉज ऑफ इंटरनेशनल बाउंड्रीज एंड फ्रंटियर्स. ठीक है. एक क्वेश्चन भी पूछा गया है. इफ यू लुक इनटू द पास्ट, देयर इज वन क्वेश्चन आस्क्ड हियर. Describe the laws of international boundaries and frontiers. It was asked in 2008. ठीक है. So this was very clearly, the question was asked in 2008. There is a chance because काफी time हो गया, there is almost 13 years have passed. So if they are asking this question, पूछ सकते हैं this year or maybe next year. So illustrate the laws of international boundaries and frontiers. अब इसको बहुत सीधा सा है, रट्टाफिकेशन वाला क्वेश्चन है ये. इसमें तीन तरह के लॉस, अपने आंसर को तीन पार्ट्स में डिवाइड करोगे, मेन बॉडी को. एंड व्हाट विल बी दैट? द मेनली द लैंड फ्रंटियर्स एंड बाउंड्रीज. इसी का एक सबसेट है वेयर रिवर्स as frontiers and boundaries. And the third one, which you already have studied, maritime boundaries, or United Nations Convention of Law of Seas, which talks about the laws related with maritime boundaries. ठीक है. सो हियर ऑलमोस्ट 60%, बहुत बड़ा है ये. दिस विल बी 20% एंड दिस विल बी 20%. लाइकवाइज यू राइट. अब देखो, इसमें बहुत से तरह के उल जलूल नाम है, मुझे भी याद नहीं रहते. सो आई जस्ट बी डिक्टेटिंग, उससे कोई फायदा नहीं होगा. आई जस्ट गिव यू अ रिटन मटेरियल, यू मग अप दैट. ठीक है. लाइक फॉर एग्जाम्पल, let me take some examples. Like for example, when we are talking about the general principles or the laws of land frontiers, you talk about the nature of boundaries. Very clearly, in today's world, the frontiers have lost significance, and mainly it is what? Mainly it is the boundaries which have replaced them. So boundaries के ऊपर होता है. So nature of boundaries. फिर इसमें और लिखोगे अदर इंपॉर्टेंट प्रिंसिपल्स जो हैं. प्रिंसिपल ऑफ उटी पोसिडेटिस. इसी तरह से देयर इज अ प्रिंसिपल रिलेटेड विथ डिस्टिंक्शन बिटवीन delimitation and demarcation. Delimitation and demarcation. Similarly, modes of acquisition of territory, laws which are related with the acquisition of territory. ठीक है, इसी तरह से देर आर 2-3 मोर लॉज. अब मैं एक एग्जांपल देता हूं. For example, if you talk about the nature of boundaries, so first thing is definition of what boundaries are. Again, very important thing about the frontiers and boundaries laws, there is no fixed kind of frontiers and boundaries laws. These have evolved over a period of time through the deliberation made by the boundary commissions, the International Court of Justice, and the various other such kind of disputes which have happened. So number of principles or laws have evolved. ठीक है, और उसी कंटेक्स्ट में व्हेन यू आर टॉकिंग अबाउट द नेचर ऑफ बाउंड्रीज, हाउ टेरिटोरियल बाउंड्रीज आर डिफाइंड. फॉर एग्जांपल, if you talk about territorial boundaries are defined as imaginary lines on the surface of the earth which separate the territory of one state from that of other, or from unappropriated territory or from the open sea. ठीक है, so they can be alignment, a line described in words in treaties or shown on map or chart, or are marked on ground by physical indicators. So like this, then boundaries are the ones which are negotiated, mediated, and litigated. There can be litigations, negotiations with respect to that. Always when there is conflict related with boundaries, it is given to international tribunals, or the countries would do what? Through the consultation mechanism, they would solve these problems by themselves. So primarily they'll solve these problems by themselves, or they will go to the third party, which will be the international tribunals. ठीक है, so like this nature of boundaries के अंदर आता है. Principle of reciprocity क्या होता है? Like for example, this principle simply states that the colonial boundaries which were formed during the colonial period. Okay, because the concept of boundary is a more modern concept. So the colonial boundaries should be basically what in principle respected. ठीक है, फॉर एग्जाम्पल इंडिया और अरुणाचल प्रदेश में तवांग को लेकर के डिस्प्यूट है. सो China says that the part of Tawang is basically culturally it is Buddhist, and it was part of Tibet before. India says no, the boundary which was demarcated during the British period, it puts that into part of India. So India जब ये बोल रहा है तो इंडिया कौन सा प्रिंसिपल यूज कर रहा है? इट इज द प्रिंसिपल ऑफ उटी पोसिडेटिस. ठीक है, so it is a very clearly defined principle, and this evolution of this principle is simply to do what? Simply to make sure that there are least number of conflicts taking place. ठीक है, so that is one. Similarly, distinction between delimitation and demarcation. So इसमें principle क्या कहता है? The law says that there should be two separate bodies for delimitation, and a separate commission should be, so one separate commission for delimitation and a separate commission for demarcation of the boundary. So if you talk about the delimitation would be done by that, it can be the International Court of Justice, or it can be an international tribunal that will be involved in the delimitation process, or any other third party. So that is the delimitation done. Now once the delimitation has been done, then another commission would be formulated. It would be involved in the demarcation of the boundaries. The idea basically is what? The idea is that whatever is decided in the delimitation commission, it is strictly followed on the ground. So not mixing the two. Otherwise, what will happen? Further conflicts would be taking place. If there is any change from what is pre-decided, it should be with agreement of both the countries essentially involved. ठीक है, मोड ऑफ एक्विजिशन ऑफ टेरिटरीज के अंदर 6-7 छोटे छोटे और प्रिंसिपल्स हैं. ठीक है, सो दिस इज व्हाट आई एम सेइंग. आई विल जस्ट गिव यू, मुझे भी बस रीड करके बोलना पड़ेगा. इट इज वेरी फैक्चुअल. सो आई विल गिव यू इन द नेक्स्ट क्लास दिस पार्ट, एंड दैट इज बेसिकली द मॉडल्स एंड थ्योरीज. अभी तक व्हाट वी हैव डन, you will see the enormous application of this when we move on to the topics. and how much easy it would become for you essentially to write a very good, I would say that a very standard answers, a very scientific type of answers, very organized answers, if you remember these all these theories. So इस टॉपिक का रेलेवेंस दो है मेरे हिसाब से. One is the direct questions which are asked every year, that is one relevance. But bigger relevance than that, according to me, is the indirect relevance which it gives to organizing the answers of rest of human geography. ठीक है. और इसलिए you have got lots of time. It is an area which should be now on the tongue. ठीक है. That is our objective. So we will stop for today. एक और चीज बता देता हूँ आलोक, कल का वो कितने बजे है सेमिनार? Tomorrow एक बार I will just message you back. There is a seminar on essay tomorrow. So those of you who want to attend, please attend. And select a student of mine who has, if you talk about, got very very good marks. 3 times he has appeared for mains. In one of them he got 154. In one of them he has got 140 something. In one of them he has got again something like 138 or something like that. So बहुत हर बार he has achieved very excellent marks in the essay. So he will be coming and he will be discussing his strategy of how he was handling the essay. ठीक है. So it will be very wise if you please attend. At least जो online भी होगा वो YouTube पे भी होगा. So उसको देखना जरूर, क्योंकि essay is remember, हम इतनी मेहनत कर रहे हैं अभी, और इतनी मेहनत करने के बाद अभी हमारा एक भी ये भी नहीं पता है कि इसमें जो हमने पढ़ा है उसमें से एक भी क्वेश्चन आएगा या नहीं आएगा. If you put the right effort in the essay, you can be very rest assured कि if you are getting somewhere around 90, 100, 110, you can easily score up to 140 मिल जाता है. ठीक है. So that's it for today. And as I told you, those of you who are appearing this year mains, you can go. And those of you who are not appearing this year mains, you can stay. I would definitely talk with you. एक minute. Just let me check the timing of the seminar. I'll just tell you. Alok, come here. एक minute जरा. Hmm? Okay, we'll message you the time. अभी पता नहीं है मेरे को. The class is being organized by the management. बंद कर दो इसे. One more thing. Next class is on perspectives. I don't want you to read anything.